So your next introduction is Carol Blessing. And many of us wonder, so where do you find these bloody people who, where do you find a Gail Jacob or a Peter Leidy or a Randy Wilkes? And of course, they have to be developed and they have to find the right ideas at the right place. So Carol Blessing is one of those people who's been doing that for a while. She's been at Cornell University for a couple of decades. But 10 years ago, she did what everybody said was impossible. She created the Citizen-Centered Leadership Program, CCLD. And that's not an easy thing to do at a big, old university. Carol did it. And she did it because she wanted to be a hub for people who are concerned about preserving the integrity of the inclusion movement while simultaneously stepping away from many of the traditional practices that hold people with disabilities back from full citizenship and in the community. So she's been recruiting and rallying talented and committed people from around the globe to join in this challenge. And happily, I can say she's one of our authors at Inclusion Press. And I can also say very happily that Carol's a friend. So Carol Blessing, 10 years of learning from CCLD.
Well, thank you, Jack. I appreciate that. It's kind of tough to follow a Peter Leidy song, but here we are. And I'm not going to show a whole presentation, but I did want to frame this speed date within this context. The artist of this is Jack Pierpoint, who, among others, including Beth Mount and John O'Brien and a host of other people, are actually the backbone to citizen-centered leadership, which, 10 years ago, it was kind of considered crazy because it's an online community of practice that is really dedicated to looking at the concept and the construct of citizenship as it relates to the ideals of humanity. And so, to kind of give you a 10 years in, when we talk in a half an hour, what I really want to share is like some of the reasons that brought me into doing the coursework, but I think the discovery and the journey and where it needs to go next, because even after a decade, as Jack said earlier, we're just not there. We're still not there. So citizen-centered leadership came about prior to my time with Cornell. I actually worked in the field, spent about 15 years providing support to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families. It's where I met Beth Mount, actually. So we've had about a 35, 36 year relationship. And shortly thereafter met Jack Pierpoint and John O'Brien and, the cast of characters that y'all know and love and who have been our role models and our mentors and our guides, right, for what it means to really think about inclusion from a place of authenticity and honesty, So in my work, I worked in a remarkable organization. It was a bit of a learning culture, and it was run by a guy named Hans Meissner. And if you've not met Hans, try to find a way to do so, and at the very least, purchase his books on blue space and innovation and, running a program and supporting people to community. And it was in under Hans's kind of vision that as a learning community, we would be able to find blue space. We would be able to, as workers, meet with people, support people, and try things out that hadn't been tried before. And to help us to learn how to do that, Hans would bring in the likes of Beth Mount and John O'Brien and Jack and Marcia and Linda and a whole host of folks. And I fell in love with this idea of person-centered planning. I just felt it was like a calling. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to go down that learning journey for 10 or 12 years to just cultivate my knowledge and my skills. And then I was invited to come to Cornell and bring some of what I knew in that work to some grants that they were doing. And so that's where I've been ever since, with the understanding that the only thing that I will do when it comes to accepting work has to do with inclusion, and it has to do with full inclusion of people. And so citizen-centered leadership came about shortly after, I was involved in some of these grants where I would kind of look around the room and look around the community and say, so, if we've had decades, literally decades of people doing person-centered planning, how is it that we're not seeing people with significant disabilities any more part of their communities as, regular members as, before? And I began to really weigh those questions out, going, where are people outside of programs and outside of services, and even those kinds of programs and services that are community minded? There's still kind of an amoeba of service providers, and folks are still sort of within those boundaries. And so that was one huge question, is like, so where are people, right? And I was noticing that person-centered planning became very, very popular, very trendy, and very institutionalized. Organizations were saying, we're going to do that, right? Everybody's going to get a person-centered plan. And everybody went to training, and everybody brought in consultants. And then what we were noticing is that lots of the methods, lots of the approaches and the processes that were invented that were called person-centered planning became adapted in ways that supported the organizations or the institutions, and tore the edges off, right? Kind of broke down the integrity of a lot of those processes. So that was really upsetting to me to notice that. And since that time, it's actually gotten even worse here in the United States, because our federal government is now mandating person-centered work, and trying to figure out how do you measure it. So that was another real draw for me. And it was very important because I had learned from the people who made this stuff up, right? And for all the right reasons, they were people with whom I was in relationship. I made a commitment that if I'm going to be bringing something called person-centered work into an arena, I will do my darndest to preserve the integrity of that work. And I thought that as it was being absorbed into the quicksand of, kind of an institutional sort of way in which we do business around here, I felt it was really important to maintain the legacy and to maintain the authenticity of its founders. And so thinking about those questions, thinking about, how do you preserve the genuineness of what's underneath what we know as person-centered planning, I decided, and I remember talking to you, Jack, at a TASH conference, saying, I have this idea, and I'm thinking that if I can, right, and I described this idea, if I can spend time with a series of questions, interviewing and videotaping thought leaders in the field, and then take those videos, take that transcript, and turn it into an online course so that people can learn from the masters, even if the masters aren't in the room. And I will make it a community of practice that's online, and a learning community where people actually do place-based learning, meaning that they'll get the ideas out of the videos and out of some field-based assignments. But I don't know what it's like in Madison, Wisconsin. I have no right to tell somebody how to do the work, right? They know that. Peter Leidy knows how to do this work. So it's up to him, right? To work with and alongside of at least two people we call learning partners, and one of whom must be an individual with lived experience of disability, to go on this learning journey together and come back once a week over a 15-week period of time and share the learning with everyone else so that we can learn from one another. And while it felt like a really crazy idea 10 years ago, it ended up being one of the most incredible opportunities for us to meet people from around the globe, kind of like this, and to make friendships, to share information and insights. And I have this library. The course is, continues to it grows with its knowledge and with its resources, but it is absolutely, and I take no credit in this regard. I feel it was divine intervention, and it's an absolute a treasure. It's just a treasure trove of these incredible videos, the thoughts, the writing, that's all there. And it's just a guided journey. And so the 10 years in, really is like, as I sit, 10 years older, much older, and somewhat wiser, I'm still asking some of those very same questions. Certainly, as people go through the course, I watched some transformation, but it was my vision and my dream that people with learning partners would go through the course. And because they're working with one person and there's an intentional design and an intentional set of principles, that I thought that people would get to a place where if I can do this with one person and help this person, assist this person to really join the ranks of humanity in a way that's purposeful and productive and making their contributions so that other people beyond service land recognize just how badly they need this person in their life. If they can do that with one person, it can become kind of the way we do business. And when it works, when people take the course and take those assignments seriously, it works really well. But I've noticed that there is more often than not sort of a stuckness, and there's a spot that we call the transformational threshold. And I watch it semester after semester, people getting to a certain point and then finding themselves too busy or finding themselves, kind of like, there's all these reasons why it's good enough to help this person to get to this place, but never really to break the bubble. And so that's my 30-minute, is to talk about, here's what I've noticed, here's what I see, help me think about some of the things that have gotten either in your way or that have challenged you, and to invite you. I have an opportunity. I've been named the Citizen Network Coordinator of the United States, and it's a lofty title that I'm not sure what to do with, except to make an invitation, especially to stateside folks, to say, if you believe in this construct that all people are born with gifts and abilities and all people have a right to equal access in community to explore, discover, and share those gifts and that purpose in life, if you believe that, and if you recognize that we all have a responsibility to give into our communities in a way that makes them better places all around, I would invite you to join me on this next 10-year journey into Citizen Network International, using CCLD as one of the mechanisms to help us to really break the stuff that's keeping people with disabilities from their rightful place. So I thank you, Jack and Linda and Patty and Dave and Beth and John, for the opportunity to not only do this today, but for the Learning Marketplace that we'll be doing in April that takes a deeper dive into how do we build bridges and tunnels that help take what we know and our craft in ways that really can be transformational and foster innovation. So thank you. And that is all.
The chaos of
So, well, welcome. How many, we got 15 folks in here now. Thanks for coming, or I see, and I thought y'all signed up. And so you've just been voluntold, so I hope it's worth your time, but thanks for being here and thanks for listening. So yeah, so my little preamble to this was this whole idea of citizenship as well, and I'll tell you that on the CCLD website, which is old and under construction, but it still works, there is a trailer, there is a small video montage of our speakers, and it really is, what does it mean to be person-centered, or what does it mean, what does citizenship mean in that context? And Beth Mount does this incredible job of saying that citizenship is at the heart of all person-centered work, and she broke it down to 3 ideals, and we use it. So we use that frame throughout the course as our mantra, as that this is our landing space, within it. So thanks anyway for being here. And so I want to say that when she talks about citizenship is at the heart of person-centered work. It was probably the inspiration for the title of this book that John O'Brien and I kind of co-edited. And if you haven't seen or gotten this book yet, no proceeds go to Cornell or to me. It's at Inclusion Press, and it is a compilation of transcripts. We've selected transcripts from those videos and moved them into topics across, just the book. So if you take the course, you get the book, but that the book, it's in and of itself is there, and it is at the heart. Like what somebody once said to me, that this book in and of itself is what people need to know if we're thinking about what is truly citizenship, and the idea behind not just citizen-centered leadership. That's I didn't know what else to call it. I didn't like the word citizen for a lot of different reasons, and it's these days it's even a little bit more of a hot potato word, but I didn't know what else to frame the idea that people who live with disability are people, and not them, not consumers, not clients, not, whatever, right? So that othering was really something that I was thinking, what is a phrase that we would be hard pressed to disassociate from, and so that's how that landed. And one of the things, so in the book, and one of the things when I asked folks, particularly, John's responses to the interview question is what keeps people with disabilities from full participation in community life? These were some of the pieces that were articulated, right? That there's, not equal access to opportunity. What's interesting is in Beth's, the 3 ideals of citizenship, the first ideal is that all people are born with gifts and potential and capacity and a purpose in life, even a highest purpose, right? And that the second ideal is that all people have the right to equal access to opportunity to explore, to discover, right? And to express those gifts. Equal access to opportunity is where I always put the bold, mark, because when we think about the programs and services, they're still very much gate kept in so many different configurations. Not everyone, right? Not all programs and services, not all organizations, but most, if I'm to be honest. And that the third ideal is that all people have a responsibility, right, to give back. And so when you look at what are some of the barriers to citizen-centeredness, like seeing people whose diversity shows up as disability, lack of equal access to opportunity and experiences at the top of the heap. And it's not just architectural in access. It isn't just because when you're in Florence, Italy, that's all cobblestones and steps. It's not only that. It's not just that. It's the idea that there are programs that open the gate if you want a job, we'll get you a job, and this person will decide and assess, and we'll have a community inclusion program, and your access to opportunities and to experiences will come through the organization. My friend Mike Mayer, whose work I'm going to introduce you to just a little tiny bit, and it gave me permission to do so prior to his death, really talks about how we've just sort of institutionalized community into believing that human service professionals and allies to people with disabilities that are very close to human service professionals are the only people who really can do this work, and that there is no, that's a responsibility that's left to the service industry. There's a lack of appreciation of ability and potential. That's why, what's funny with these speakeasies and these conversations is I want to be in Jessica's and I want to be in Peter Leidy's. I want to hear those stories too, because, when you think about Darwin and what we just learned, I just met the man on film, right? And I would like to know him. And the idea that this is a man who spent the bulk of his life institutionalized and brutalized and just kept away from it and didn't use words to communicate, could not motor around on his own steam and needed all kinds of support. But who we met, a half an hour or so ago was a man with great potential and ability and had a significant contribution to make in the lives of people and in his community. John talks in our class about the presence of fear of otherness, that we're afraid, society as a whole is afraid of the difference that is, that comes along with the disability. We don't know what to do with it, and God knows. And John actually puts in writing that we'd rather, in some cases, be dead than to think of ourselves in the same situation as people with disabilities. And there's this whole myth, as you guys know, of the idea of independence, right? That people need to be independent before they are ready for the community, or that the community is ready for them. And it's, especially in the United States, that's such a solid and strong message that if you can't do it alone, you're not ready at all. And then that last piece is of this idea, and this is my insertion, and it's this idea of unconscious bias. So I think this is probably one of the most important things that we try to attend to. And like Lori's been in the course, a couple of folks have taken the course, is this idea. I say all the time that this is first an inside job. When people work with people in the service industry, we're oftentimes given, wings and a crown and a halo or something because we're special. I couldn't do what you do kind of stuff. Or, we recognize our own belief and passion around equitable access or humanity and such. And in all of that, there is a trap. And I think the trap is that we have been raised to believe these things are in existence. We have been raised to kind of co-produce the very barriers that we're working against. And the first order is to kind of think about, what do I believe? And I use myself a lot as an example. And, I had 15, 16 years working with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And one of the things that happened when I came to Cornell was to bring person-centered work in two places. One was maximum security prisons, and another was in state psychiatric centers. And the prison didn't bother me as much because they were individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities for the most part. But in the psych centers, I had never worked with people who had mental health concerns, or at least to the extent that my work in the institutions across New York State entailed. And I remember thinking, well, I'm all person-centered. I've been trained by the best, and I do this work daily. I've invented my own little process, all of that stuff. And when I came face to face, though, with this animal of psychiatric disability, I realized that I had to really dig deep into what my own thoughts and beliefs were about that population of people. And I suddenly realized in that insight that, when we are talking about citizen-centered leadership, or you're talking about person-centered work, it isn't disability specific at all, right? And so it isn't. So what has happened in terms of the idea of institutionalization and pulling person-centered work into organizations and making it theirs, is there's been, person-centered planning has taken on its own life, and it's become kind of a model. It's a program. It's something that people get, not how we actually are in this in the space of humanity with each other, regardless, right? Regardless of what we might show up with, if that makes sense to folks. And then I add this last one, and I touched on it out there in the big room. And I think that, one of the barriers is the idea of inclusion itself. It's kind of become, a phrase. It's become a program. I worked in an agency where we did community inclusion. We had a community inclusion program, and it became something that you could market. It became, and some people got it, meaning some people were tagged. What you need community inclusion. What you need sheltered employment, or you need supported employment. So it became something commodified that we could put a label on, the same as person-centered work, right? That we could call it something, but we mean something very, very different. So I challenge people, and I want us to think hard about, is it, when we think about we do inclusion or we believe in it, what does it really look like? What does it look like in our hearts? And how can we point to living examples of where it's worked as a result of the way we've used resources, where it's worked as a result of the way we've intentionally designed our talents, around the support of somebody. And so the idea that if we were to think of citizenship, like citizen-centered, human-centered work, meaning that in a radical way, meaning that disability is part of the human condition, and it always will be. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? So the idea that not only it's even beyond the social construct of disability, which is like it's an external thing, that we want to radicalize the idea of citizenship and disability, meaning you do belong because you're a human being, and that and operate from a place of as if, hey, you know what I mean? Like that's the way it is. Not it shouldn't be something somebody needs to be able to be granted, or someone has a key. So this was an interesting thing. Actually, the guy who did my video, my producer of the video, actually sat with me and helped me to think through this, because he was not connected to the disability community. And having spent the year with me going around and videotaping and editing at my kitchen table, he developed a deep appreciation of what it is that we are trying to do. And he really talks about the disconnect between the individual needs and what resources they have, right? And the needs of society as whole and the resources. And in our case, in many cases, people without labels of disability or distinction and marginalization, there's a balanced relationship between that. We pick, we choose, we are consumers, right? We can decide how and where and what, we can give and take as it makes sense to us. And it's a negotiation we make within our own local neighborhoods, societies, and communities. But it's not the same. There's a dilemma that, when the needs of an individual exceed or are greater than the resources of society, like the level of support that somebody might need, or the accommodations or the accessibility that might need to happen, society, meaning community, meaning everyone who's not, like paid to be with somebody, has to make decisions about how they're going to step up. And that's a pretty interesting piece. And so I want to challenge, and we challenge people to think about what does it mean then? What does it really truly mean when we talk about disability? And when people are identified and defined because of disability, even our programs and services, right? So when we think about our own disability related resources, even for most of them with the best of intentions, we still, the focus is on disability at some level. Whether, we've got to get the funding and we've got to, justify the existence of why we do what we do. But when our construct, when the design of our services and supports is really tailored to the idea of disability, and the needs of the person are incredibly great, and our resources are limited. There's only so much time, there's only so much money, there's only so much talent, there's only so, right? There's this idea that, in the old models, right? The body is flawed, it's broken, it needs help. And that's where the model of eugenics and medical and the charity models all found themselves, standing on firm ground. And then, later on in our history, disabled people are oppressed, and, we recognize that. And so we moved into a rights movement. And now the social model of disability that says if the environment, it's environmental factors, that if we can mitigate that, then people's disability will not preclude them from being gainful and active citizens. But all of this doesn't go far enough, especially, just as we have come into a more progressive kind of ideology, it's not far enough, because as long as we're really continuing to see a disability factor as a defining part of a person's life, there's not really the kind of room for intentional citizenship that I emphasize in our course, in our work, right? So we want to frame, I work really hard to just like flip that switch, flip it from, let's talk about what does it mean to be a citizen? What does it mean to be on par with one another? And how do we use our resources in ways that help that individual or individuals to actually identify their gifts, their skills, their purpose in life? How do we use our limited time and money and energy and talent to open up equal access to opportunity where those gifts and that purpose in life can find their way, so that when the person makes a contribution, it makes sense, and those who are around them recognize it as valuable and necessary. And the question then of the support somebody needs becomes secondary to the fact that this is working. And the support can happen in a number of different ways, not only from people who are paid to be there. Does that make sense to folks? Yeah. I feel like I'm rambling because, I've only got, X amount of time, and I do want to hear from y'all. So if you don't mind, I'll just kind of push through, unless there's a question about that distinction. So one of the major things that I try to do in the 15-week intensive, right? It's an online course. So you get you pay for the course, you go in, you invite 2 learning partners or more, one of whom must be somebody with lived experience. You take the course, but they take you on their journey. You go with, right? You bring the resources out of the course and into community and into the relationship that you establish with your learning partners. The second learning partner should be somebody to guide you or to support you, or who may be able to move. If you work in a place that's rather rigid, maybe be able to bend some rules or break some of the laws or whatever, so that you have some blue space. Or it's somebody who can just to bounce ideas off of. One of the principal contributors in the course is a woman by the name of Diana Whitney. And Diana is known for her work in appreciative inquiry. And there are 6 modules in the course, and they're all interdependent. And one of them is organizational change. And it's about how do you build a person-centered organization. And Diana is our expert in that, because the idea of appreciative inquiry, I think, is a parallel process to what we understand to be person-centered work. And if you don't bring it into the organization, if we don't operate within our organizations in the same way we're expecting staff to operate when they go to training in person-centered planning, how would we expect anything to be different? And so anyway, so let me just get off that horse for a second. So a breath, right? There are additional barriers, and I call them divides, right? Not only the value of independence, but the bias, we're up against, it's a Sisyphus, right? So when people come into the course, and right all over the place, you must have learning partners. This is an inside journal. There's journals. There are reflective prompts throughout the course. There are, books, there are readings. You can go into the video library and listen to our speakers at any point, but they're also embedded into the body across these 6 different modules. And we ask straight up, what are you worried about? Right? Because when we think about true connection in community, in inclusion, really when people belong, as Jessica just so beautifully described, right? When the work of helping people to move into that place is very hard, and it's very different, and we are up against these societal challenges, and we know them and we embody them, right? And even though we have the shield of good intentions and even some of the best training in the world, these things push back against us. And honest to what I watch with the people who participate in this community of practice is I watch folks get to a certain point, right, in their work with people, and then they're up against any one, if not more, or all of these challenges, and I watch people just bounce back, and that's the space. That's the space where I'm a little disappointed, every semester I want to see the stories unfold, and I see them to a point, and then something like this is, one of these elements or a combination of them sort of shows up, and people just get just as some spot and then may stop or think they're already there. That's almost worse in a way. They oftentimes people think that they're already doing it and don't check their assumption at the door. So the transformational threshold, right, is the space between what we do and what we say we do, and then what really happens in people's lives. And built into, I believe, and I don't know if John would agree, but I believe that there is measurement, that you can watch an evolution of a person's experiences and valued social roles, and keep track of that. And so I ask people to do that in an ongoing field assignment I call Profile of a Citizen. And it starts with a worksheet that takes a snapshot of who is this person today? Where do they spend their time? With whom? What's the duration of their time in community? Who's around them? Where do they get their support? What are their goals and their visions for themselves as a human being? You know, what's their purpose in life? Those types of questions. And then after the, you know, as the field assignment, you know, unfolds throughout the entire 15 weeks, I ask those same questions on the other end of it. What's shifted? Now what? Because you're listening to the greats, right? You know, you've got all these resources at your fingertips. You've gotten the community of practice to bounce ideas and to share ideas off with, you know, you've built friendships and resources. You've been working with your learning partners for 15 weeks. What's different? And when people have done the work the way it's intended and really push through their own fears, recognize their own biases, and work within our virtual learning community, we meet via a web, we meet via Zoom once a week. When we talk honestly about what we're afraid of and how, how we get through it, that's where we start noticing real transformation beginning to happen, because we're owning it. And then, you know, we're guiding one another. And what's really cool about when that happens, you know, is people know they're not alone, and there's sort of a courage that people dip into and move forward with. I use artifacts like questions, like, so I might take a quote from O'Brien or from Beth Mount and I put them on beautiful, Dave Hasbury, you would be phenomenal at creating these with me, put them on beautiful imagery, you know, and they're prompts, and we give every person who takes the course these sets of what I call conversation starters or calling cards, and each postcard has a beautiful image, and within the image itself is a prompt. And the prompt, if you throw it on the table and say, let's talk about this. One of our favorites is a quote by John that says, how are we standing on what we're trying to lift? How are we getting in our own ways over something that we say we really want and that we want to do? And another one he asks is, do we have the courage to bend or break through these societal kind of structures that hold people in their place? Do we have the courage to kind of slip through the cracks, to break through that? And those are important questions, because the work takes a lot of courage if it's going to result in people expanding relationships in their life, people who really want to be with them, people who recognize and respect them for who they are and what they bring. If they're invited, right, you know, and people are glad that they're there, if they get real work for real pay in the real world, and that they're making decisions about their own life, big and little, we can measure that. We can see the difference, right? So here's my friend Mike Mayer's model. It's a whole framework called 5-Star Quality, from compliance to citizenship. And before he died, Mike and I were really good friends. And I just felt this, I use this throughout the course, because, and it's not about judgy, it's not to try to, you know, have people to feel in any way judged, but to recognize that most of us are working within some kind of a container, particularly if we're funded. And that container is called the system, and that the individual who receives services is a byproduct of the system, because at the end of the day, compliance is what our systems care the most about. Because if you take away our money, we can't do the work that we want to do. And so the customer is really system compliance. It's really the idea that we have got to please the gods. We've got to feed that animal in order to do the work that we're doing. And that's the interesting part, right? So here in the United States, and this is where I get a little cheeky, here in the States, what I noticed was that the system had adopted person-centered planning. They've integrated whatever tool that they thought was a really good one, and said everybody shall have this and all staff will be doing this. And now we're being person-centered, you see. And in the United States, our federal government has actually identified tools that they call person-centered and are mandating any provider agency that receives a certain kind of funding from the federal government must comply with these regulations about being person-centered. And so what's interesting, that's a question for how are we standing on what we're trying to lift. The tools and the resources that are being sold to organizations literally, in my mind, completely biased, but in my mind, keep people exactly where they are and help, as Jess was talking, I think it was Jess was talking about a little while ago, people feel better about what they're doing. 2 minutes, people feel better, but it doesn't get a lot across the line, right? And 5-star quality is when people really are of the community, right? So I want to really quickly, because now I have 2 minutes, I cannot even believe it. Oh, shoot. Well, I don't know why that's, oh, there we go. And so the difference is in intention, right? So this line is called the transformational threshold. And the idea is that we sit inside of there, we get up to the line, but then we have to decide if or how we're going to cross that line, right? To get to, the conscious, to get to a place where we're using our services, our resources, our limited, stuff in very practical ways. And these are the things that are really the qualifiers, right? Below the line stuff, if we're putting in person-centered or inclusion programs and projects, if we're worried about complying, if we accept better, then we got a problem. And this is where I find people struggling in the course. The up arrow is we care about those valued outcomes as a person has defined them for their own life. There's a conscious resolve to do this work and to own our own part of it. And then, of course, there's executive support, like our bosses, the people who sent us, or our friends, or, however we got here, have sanctioned us to be here and are in it with us, that they're not just sending somebody to CCLD training and then not supporting the implementation of it, but there's actual, okay, how do we do something different? So the divide happens when we think about radical citizenship. Everybody belongs, right? The valued outcomes, and then the societal challenges. And this is the break. This is where I see people just fall down, right? Well, that's too bad. And I want to invite people to think about how to bring that together. I think we can forge that. And I think that's the next 10 years. So, my friend Pat Deegan says, they may tell you that the goal should be to enter the mainstream. Don't. Tell the mainstream to grow wider and more inclusive. We want a wide stream, not a mainstream. Come to the virtual TSI, right? Come to the